And without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Terry, and kick it over to you.
Okay, let me share mine. Okay, so I'm going to start with just a brief introduction. Matt did ask if I was a self-proclaimed subject matter expert. I guess kind of. I guess aren't we all? But back in 2014, I worked for a Bluebeam reseller, and I did go through all of the training and testing and certification. And I was certified as a consultant and an instructor. And I've been teaching Bluebeam and providing consulting services as part of my job for the last 6 years. All of my contact information is on the screen if any of you want to talk to me afterwards. If you've got any layer related or just Bluebeam related questions you'd like to discuss, just give me a reach out. I've got a YouTube channel where I upload videos all about Bluebeam. Everything is 2019 or later. I try to keep all of the feature specific videos to 10 minutes or less. Some of them are only 2 or 3 minutes long. That is a long URL, so I cut and pasted it into the chat window. So if you do want to visit it and subscribe to it so that you're notified when new videos are uploaded, I average one every 2 weeks or so. You can just go to the chat window and hit that link and decide if you want to subscribe to that or not. As far as tonight's agenda, I was asked to talk about layers, and I broke it down into 4 different subjects. Just a quick history of how layers were created long before Bluebeam, and then Bluebeam's rules. And there are some issues with layers as it relates to Bluebeam. We're going to talk about those so that you're forewarned. None of them are showstoppers, but you need to know about them as you're planning your use of layers so that you can not get surprised by results. Then we'll talk about using layers specifically with tool sets, and then most importantly to me, using layers in a studio session with tool sets as well. So just as a history lesson for any of you who never dealt with this, when I went into the AEC industry in 1980, that's what the world was like. We were bored draftsmen, draftspeople trying to get drawings out. And even then, we wanted to work together. And there wasn't a whole lot of options for working together in that environment. One of those options was this, print out the world's biggest piece of paper and take turns in your little section. And that was the world we lived in. Now that eventually evolved, and we moved away from paper and even linen. Those gentlemen were actually working on linen cloth with ink on linen drafting activities. But we moved into a world where we were working on clear sheets of material, either vellum or mylar, something along those lines, so that we could each work on our portion of the job, but then we could overlay those sheets on a regular basis to see what the other person was doing and make, that was our version of clash detection, was overlaying these sheets of paper. And the really sophisticated system that made all that work were these little holes in the mylar or vellum sheets itself. Everybody's sheet had these alignment pins that you would lay it on top of it, and it would make sure everything was set up properly so that you could look for those clashes and things. That's the world that layers came from. Now, when CAD first came out, it was an obvious thing that they needed to support were layers. And we're talking when Autodesk first came out, there were no external references. AutoCAD didn't have any. The technology I started with, IGDS and MicroStation, we had a grand total of 63 levels. They all were numbered. They couldn't be named at all, and you had a grand total of 3 overlayable reference files. AutoCAD had none, and it wasn't until later on that we got to the point where we have XRefs and reference files and distributed and BIM and all the things that we deal with now. But this is where layers came from, a desire to let different people work on different parts of the job and then be able to overlay our work and make sure that what I'm doing is coordinated with what you're doing, but also keep each other's stuff separate. And that's what layers are in CAD today, and that's what layers are in Bluebeam as well. So I'm going to hit escape to get out of this presentation mode, and the rest of this is going to have the slide on the right, and on the left hand side I'll be doing the activities that are listed in this slide. So I've got about, I don't know, 15, 16 topics, rules, suggestions, discussion things about layers, and I'm going to run through each of those and show it to you live. So first of all, a named layer can exist within a PDF file even if there are no markups upon it. Over here I've got a brand new PDF, and if I go, and by the way, it's really annoying to me to have to jump between layers and tool sets or layers and whatever else. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab layers and just drag it over, and I'm going to split my panel there so that I've got tool sets and layers. Pop it right there. So I've got tool sets at the bottom down here, and I've got layers at the top. So as I'm doing something with my tool set, you'll be able to simultaneously see the impact of that in the upper left hand corner. So I just split that in half. Anybody should be able to do that if you haven't done that before. First thing is you can create layers from scratch. When you're in the layer panel, you just go up there and you say, I want to add a new layer. And if there were any existing layers, it would say before or after that existing layer. So right now it really doesn't matter which button I choose. I'm just going to say after. And I'm going to say red. So I created a layer called red. You see how it's grayed out. That means it exists, but nothing currently resides upon it. If I come over here and I choose any markup type, but I choose to draw this pen, it's still grayed out because that markup was not specifically put on that layer. When you just go and grab a markup and just throw it into a file, it doesn't necessarily go into a specific layer. If I click on that markup or right click and I go look at my layers, there's only one currently available called red, and it didn't automatically assign that markup to that layer. If I wanted to do that, I would choose red, and now that markup is on that layer, and that layer is now highlighted. It's bright in nature as opposed to being grayed out, and that's a visual indicator to you that that layer not only exists, but it has something drawn on it, whatever that is. Right? And you can now, with the use of that little eyeball icon, that's like a checkbox. It's either on or off. Right now, anything that is drawn on that layer is displayed. If I turn it off, anything that is on that layer will now be hidden. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff we're going to talk about in addition to that, but that's just the beginning of this. So a layer can exist even though there's nothing drawn on it. So I'm going to add another one. I'm going to add one called blue, and I'm going to add one more, and I'm just going to call it green. So I've got 3 layers, one of which has stuff on it, and 2 of which do not. Now, I'm going to leave that up, and you're going to see various activities that happen to that as we walk through the rest of this presentation on the right-hand side. Any markup can be assigned to an existing layer, or a new layer can be created to accommodate it. Well, we already know that this one is on the layer called red. If I come in here and grab a highlighter, and my highlighter currently is set to yellow, and I wanted a layer called yellow, I could go and create one from scratch, or I could just right-click on it and say layer. I don't want red, I don't want blue, I don't want green, I want one called yellow. It doesn't exist, so I'll shortcut that by saying just create a new layer and call it yellow. So now I did 2 things. I created the layer and assigned the markup to that layer all in one step instead of having to do 2 completely separate activities. And again, you can see that there are 4 layers. 2 have things drawn on them, very specific, individual, unique things, and the other 2 layers still don't have anything on them at all. One of the things you need to know is set default ignores and does not honor layer assignments. All right, that's the first thing that a lot of people get surprised by. They're very used to being able to go into a highlight and change the color from yellow to maybe a blue or something like that, and then change the thickness and change the opacity and change all of those various things like that, and then being able to going into here and then saying set as default or being able to simply right click on it and use the same set as default down there. Well, when it comes to layers, that's a problem, is because right now these are all my defaults. And if I right click on that and I say I want that on the layer called blue, well, we see here blue just got highlighted, so that markup just got moved to the blue layer. But even though that's done, and even though I have it highlighted, and even though I go and say set as default, it's really not doing it as it relates to layers. If I come back and do something different, and then I come back later on and grab that highlighter and I do that sort of thing, it may look like it remembered it, but when I click on it and right click on it and go to layers, it doesn't enforce that. It doesn't remember the layer portion when you just use set as default. There's a way to do it, and that's what Toolsets are for. But don't think that set as default is going to do anything with your layers, because it doesn't. It will simply ignore them. Okay, a named layer, any named layer, can be temporarily designated as your markup layer, and anything you draw during that particular Bluebeam session, not a Bluebeam Studio session, but just the instance of Bluebeam that you're currently running, anything you do while that instance is active will be pushed automatically to that markup layer. The way you do that is I'm gonna grab all of that stuff and just delete it. And I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna go into the layer panel and I'm gonna choose green and I'm gonna right click on it, and there's a selectable menu thing right there that says markup layer. Now when I choose that, it even gives me a little dialog box, unless you dismiss this thing, that says, okay, anything you do until you shut down Bluebeam is going to be forced onto that layer no matter what. And I'm just acknowledging that. So now if I come over here and grab a cloud and I draw a cloud, well, guess what layer it went to? Green. If I grab my highlighter and I do a highlighter, guess what layer it went to? Text, a cloud plus, callouts, lines, arcs, area measurements. Anything I'm doing there, when I go and click on that object and I right click and go look at layer assignments, it didn't go to none, which is its standard behavior. They all went to green only because green had been designated temporarily as the markup layer for this Bluebeam activity. You could turn that off whenever you want, and now it's just going to default back to the standard behavior. So if I go grab another highlighter and come in here and do that sort of thing, this one is on the green layer. But this one, when I right click on it, it has defaulted back to the standard behavior of going to none, having no specific layer assignment to it. And then you would have to decide exactly what you want to do with that. Layers can have a hierarchical tree structure, but there are some catches with that. Now I'm going to open up another file. I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to the one that has a tree example in it. Okay, in this example here, I've drawn all these clouds, and all of these clouds are related to these layers. And what you're seeing here is a parent, child, grandchild, great-grandchild hierarchical relationship between all these layers. So if I went to layer A2A1 and just told it to turn it off, it would just turn off that layer. If I went to layer A2A and I turned it off, it would turn off itself and any of its children, grandchildren, and down the line. So if I go to A2 and turn it off, it gets not only A2A, but A2B in addition to that. And if I go to A, it gets the entire family, the entire tree. Same thing with B. I can go individually to either of the children, or I can go straight to the parent, but they're still independent from each other. They're two totally separate family trees. There's one specific issue with that you have to know about. It is a known, I don't want to call it a bug, but it's a known situation that Bluebeam is deciding how they want to deal with it. But here's what happens. You have a file like this with this structured hierarchical tree, and you then go into the markup list for a document that's prepared that way, and you do a markup export. Now that creates a BAX file, a Bluebeam annotation exchange file, and somebody else can then import those markups into their drawing, right, which is what we're going to do. And it works great when you have normal markups on normal layers. But when you have hierarchical layers structure like this, it experiences a problem. So I'm going to take this file, I'm going to create this BAX file. So now I've got from this document all of the markups. I'm going to create a new document, and I'm just going to hit OK, put it right there, and I'm going to go straight to the markup list, and I'm going to import that exact same BAX file, which is sitting right here. And it recreated everything, but notice what it did. This is the original. It's got a hierarchical relationship structure. This is the resulting file that has now had those markups imported. They're there. The markups are there. The layer names are there. What gets lost in translation is the structure. I could recreate it. I could grab A1 and just drag it up to A, and I could recreate, the parent-child relationship. I could take A2A and A2B. It wouldn't take me long to do it, but still, it's an issue that you need to be aware of if indeed you ever intend to work with hierarchical tree-structured layers. Because I, from time to time, do receive documents from people that I work with and clients and people that we're doing training for that have that structure, and it's an issue to be aware of. One of the things you may or may not be aware of is that deleting a markup does not delete the layer that it's put upon. If I come over here and I grab with this selection tool, I grab everything that's drawn on layer B1 and I just hit the delete key. All the markups are gone, but notice that the layer remains. The B1 layer is still there. If I actually want to get rid of it, I need to right click on there and delete that layer if I wanted to do it. Now B2, I could streamline that process by going straight to B2 and saying delete the layer and choosing for it to delete the content and the annotations. Annotations in this case are markups. Then it would just streamline the process of deleting those. But deleting a markup does not automatically delete the layer that was placed upon. And that's important when we talk in just a few minutes about using scripts in order to automatically set up your layering in a consistent way before you do something important like going to a studio session. One of the advantages of having a layered document like this one here, and it doesn't have to be a hierarchical layer structure, it could be just layers in general, but one of the advantages of having that is that you can selectively choose what you want to share and what you don't want to share. And I think it may have been in one of my notes before. If not, it'll be popping up here in just a second. If you have I think it's down under Toolsets, but you're going to see it early. When I go to Toolsets and I look at my Toolsets, I've got a bunch of markups in my Toolsets here that have been created in such a way that if I hover, they already have an anticipation of being created and placed on a specifically named layer. Like all of my inspection markups have a layer called inspectors. And all the project manager markups have an expectation of being placed on a layer called project managers. Well, if the file doesn't have that, and I'm working by myself, I'm working standalone, meaning I'm not in the cloud in a studio session. If I go in there and place that object, if the layer doesn't exist to support that standardized rule that says, okay, I'll let you create this thing, but I want it to be on a named layer, it will auto-generate that layer for you in order to enforce the rules that you've created. So I'll do the same thing now with inspector stuff. I'll choose this one, which is this is a safety markup. This one is signage. This one is curbing, all of these examples. Now this one's probably going to ask me to set a scale. Yeah, bear with me. I'll just pop that in there real quick. I'll say that from here to here is 5 feet. And then this last one is guardrails. and I'll do that sort of thing, and we'll get that in there. But for each one of those, you see it automatically generated the required named layer in order to support the established symbology standards. And each one of those things is, independently placed on their own particular layer. What this is talking about is, right now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, 6 or 7 different markups out there on 6 or 7 different layers. And if I went down to here and I said markups export, it's going to get everything. There's no way to stop that. It's going to create a BAX file that has every single thing in it. With the use of layers with your markups, you can be more selective. If the only thing I wanted to export and share with somebody else was, for example, the project management markups, I can use that named layer to my advantage. And instead of going to the markup list, I just go to the layer panel. I right click on project managers, which is where this red cloud is drawn. And when I right click, I say, I want to export only what is on the selected layer. And I'll say export that to a new page. And I'm just going to pop it in here. I'm going to call this the Omaha BUG demo. It's going to create a new file, but instead of taking everything from this file, it only took the one thing I wanted. And in the other document, what it did is it created the markup. And this is something I've seen. I did a lot of testing with this today. You see what's happening with this one here is that it recreated the markup, but it did not recreate the named layer. Now, I've done that in 4 or 5 different files today in preparation for tonight's presentation. And I don't see a consistent pattern to it, but I've seen half the time it recreates it with the named layer and half the time it doesn't create it with the named layer. So even though you can work with layers and from here you can do your export option and limit it to a specific layer, you need to double check the result of that to make sure that the named layers are being generated, because sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And I just learned that today in preparation for tonight's event, so I haven't even had time to report that one yet, but just be aware of that. It's a great tool, but it doesn't work 100% every single time, so double check your work in the new file that gets created. Let's see next. Markups on specific layers can be set. Oh, I'm not sure if you guys were aware of this or not. This is common in a lot of geographical information systems like ArcGIS, where I don't see vegetation, I don't see, various pieces of information in the geographical display until I zoom in to a certain magnification level. You may not be aware, but Bluebeam does that with layer content if you set it up to do so. Now I'm going to open another file. I'm going to kill this one. I'll kill this one. And I'll kill this one. This one is called Display by Zoom. Okay, and let's split that back over again. Now, what I have is, in this drawing right here, I have 3 layers. And if I turn off layer 1, that's the outside border. And layer 2 is the sort of the title block area. And then layer 3 is off. I'm not going to force it on because I want you to see how I've got it set up. When I go in here and I start zooming in, all right, by using my mouse wheel and the control key here. When I reach a certain magnification, and it's not random, it's a value that I chose. When I zoom in to where my screen is 200% instead of 100% or 150 or 179 or wherever I may happen to be zoomed into, when I reach that magnification value of 200%, anything on layer 3 just magically becomes displayable. I don't have to do anything. I just set it up and it enforces that. So from here, if I continue to zoom in, it continues to display. But if I start to zoom out, when I get, see right now I'm at 200 or greater. Right here, I might be at 180, but that is not within my range, so it just turns that layer off automatically. Now, the way you do that, the way you establish that, is you go to that layer, you right click, and you go to Layer Properties. Under Layer Properties, there's a whole bunch of values that you can do in here. The default state of it, is that layer on or off? If it's on or off, is it automatically locked when you first start working on this file? I've got mine set to just all of the standard defaults except the bottom one. I changed the zoom, which is normally set to use default, and I changed it to this layer will only be on when the zoom is between 200 and 1200%. And I could have set that to any value I wanted there, but those are just the values that I chose. So you can do that to any layer in any PDF file. You could then have it locked so that nobody, most people aren't playing around inside of the layers. They would never even know it's locked and never know that those rules are there. But you can certainly take advantage of that to enable or disable the display of certain information based on a zoom scale factor. Now this one is interesting when you, and again, it's been reported to Bluebeam, when I go into a file, like this file right here that I have active that has these 3 layers in it, anytime you're working in any PDF file, you can go to File and you can go to New PDF from a template, and you can put Save as a template. You can take any PDF you want and you can make it part of your template collection. You need to be aware of the fact that when you do that, it will appear to support documents that have named layers, even if they don't have anything drawn on them, but that really isn't the way it's going to function. Here's what happens with that. I'm going to go into File, PDF Template, and I'm going to go down to this one right here that says has named layers, and it does. If I go into the template editor, I click right here, okay, I want to edit that file. This is a standard PDF file that was created some time ago with all of these 16 or 17 pre-named layers, and I'm editing the template right now. They're obviously there. That would tend my logic to lean to the expectation that if I do a file, create a new PDF from a template, and I choose the one that has named layers, I would get a clean, like it copied the file, which is the expectation of a seed or template file. But that's not what happens if the named layer doesn't have any markups on it. So if I come in here and just say, yeah, give me a new file from that one, that's what I get. I get a file that's an exact copy of it with the exception of the named layers. They are not regenerated as a result of using a file with a template. If that worked, that'd be a great use of templates, is to be able to have a template with named layers that have nothing on them, and then when you create the new document, everything's good to go. But that feature is not currently working that way. There's another issue as it relates to working with templates as well. Here's another exact type of file. This template here has a layer tree. If I go into the editor here, you can see it's a copy of that file that I used before, and it's got stuff drawn on it, and it's got named layers, and it's got a hierarchy. So that one, it's got stuff on it. So theoretically, it should work. But it also has an issue. When I do a file, create a new PDF from a template, and I use that document as my template file, it kind of works. It creates the file, it creates the markups, but it does the same thing the export does. It flattens my hierarchical structure. It recreates the markups and the layer names, but it doesn't honor the family relationships that were put into the template file, into the original file that I saved as a template and was hoping to be able to use that to create new documents. So again, this is a fantastic tool. I use it all the time, but when it comes to layered PDFs and layer names, you have to understand its limitations and do some experimentation to make sure that you understand it and the results that you're going to get. One of the things you can do if you have the Bluebeam Review Extreme Edition is you can write a simple script that will automatically create the layer names you need before you take the file to like a studio session. I did on my YouTube channel, I did a video showing exactly how to do this. So I'm not going to cover it in detail tonight, but you can certainly go watch it. It's like a 5-minute video that tells you how to do it. But here's how it works is this is a PDF file that I extracted from a PowerPoint. It doesn't have any layers in it at all. But if I was about to take this thing to a studio session and I wanted my layer names there before I did that, because that is a requirement, you have to have them in the file before you take it to a session in order for them to work, I would just hit this one button right here that says Layer Setup, and that's what it does. It automatically goes to a template that I have set up. It creates what it needs for those layer names, and then it's done. It literally took half a second. I got the same thing for custom columns. Those two could even be combined so that you just hit one button and it does your columns and your layers and you're good to go. But that is something that is really easy to do with scripts if you have the Extreme Edition. All right, so two pieces of advice here as I'm moving out of the things you need to know about layers when you're working by yourself and then go into Toolsets and then go into the studio sessions is the best way to ensure a good, consistent, professional use of layer names in Bluebeam is to define your layer standard. Publish that standard and share it with all of your project participants and establish an expectation that they adhere to it so that when they hand you a PDF file, it's already structured with the appropriate names that you need in order for everything to work right when you're dealing with tool sets and when you're dealing with studio sessions. So speaking of layers and tool sets, I already showed you a little bit of this, but if you do have tool sets that in that tool set you have created markups with specific layer assignments, like everything in that tool set goes to a layer called architect. Everything in here goes to one called electrical, project manager, and inspectors, and these are in all sorts of different layers. Even if it has to create one from scratch, it will do so when you're working outside of studio sessions. Right? So like right now, this file does not have the required labels or layer names for inspectors. But if I go and draw a markup on here, it just created it, which is what it does. It won't do that when your file is in a studio session. If the layer name inspectors is not already there waiting for markups to be placed upon it, it will not auto-create it. It will simply draw the markup, but it will put it on layer none. So that's the key thing here about layers and tool sets is you can establish markups with layer assignments in addition to all the colors and weights and transparencies and all that sort of thing, but you can also have layers as well. And when you're working standalone, it'll recreate whatever it needs, but it won't do that in the cloud. So be aware of that. You have to do that up front. Any markup you create can be assigned to a layer and then added to a tool set, and it will remember that layer. Unlike the set as default, which ignored it, when you put it into a tool set, it remembers it. So if I came here and I drew let's just draw a rectangle from here to here, and I'm going to change, I'm going to give that, let's see, I want to have a yellow fill, and I want to have a diagonal type thing there. That markup is like a safety zone, and I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to go to layer, and I'm going to go create a brand new layer because I don't have one called safety at this point. And I'm going to say that this is a safety markup, therefore it's on the safety layer, which automatically just got created when I gave it that name. But when I look at the properties of this thing, it doesn't, all it says is rectangle. So what I would do is I would say this is a safety zone shape, whatever you would want to call that thing. But those are the two critical things to me anytime I'm taking a markup and putting it into a tool set is there's three things. What does it look like? What layer is it on? And what subject does it have? I never put one into a tool set until those three things are the way I want them. Then I would right click on it and say add to tool chest and pick which one. I'm going to put it in, I'll put it in inspectors since it's up there right now. So it just created that markup right there. See, if I just hover my mouse over it without clicking, it shows me the subject label, safety zone shape, but it also will display to me a layer assignment name if it was created with that already. See, if I had just come in here and drawn a rectangle, from here to here, even if I match the properties of this thing, let's do a format painter and then pop it down here. When I go click on that thing and I look at the layers, right, see it didn't take the layer with it. Right? That's not part of the format painter. That just does aesthetics, not really the layer assignments and so on. So if I hadn't put that thing on a specific layer and I right clicked on it and said add to tool chest and I used the same tool chest, they look the same. They really do. They're identical visually. But this one is drawn on a specific layer and this one is not. And therefore, anytime I use this one and place it into a drawing, it will either go to the none layer assignment, or if during the session somebody had a layer and they did that markup layer option, then it would automatically force it. If you have a markup over here that doesn't have a layer assignment and this is enabled, it will go to whatever layer you temporarily made your markup layer. It will do that. Well, let's do that real quick. I'm going to choose the layer called region and TSCs, and I'm going to make that my markup layer, just temporarily. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to delete that, and delete that, right? So right now, my I don't remember which one it is. I'm going to grab Geotech and make that one it, markup layer. All right, so that's the one. If I go get this one, which has a layer assignment, and I place it in the file, it did not go on to Geotech, because even though that's the markup layer, this is coming from a tool set and it already had an established layer assignment. So that supersedes the markup layer. However, this one that doesn't have a layer assignment, previously when I placed it, it just went to none. This time when I place it, I'll place it right there, it got placed, but it also got assigned to the temporary markup layer, which we selected as Geotech. So there, it's which way works best for you. I would prefer to have a library of established symbologies that have established layer names than to personally work with a markup layer and let unassigned stuff just temporarily go where I've temporarily decided it needed to be. But the beauty of Bluebeam is you're not locked into one methodology or another. They both work. It depends on which one works for you. All right, so moving past that, it says, oh, yeah, I was just about to show you what I call grouped markups. All right, I've got a file here I'm going to open up to illustrate this. Let me go to Files and go to Groups. What I have on the screen right now are a total of 9 markups. All right, everything in red is on the project manager's layer. Everything in blue is on the inspector's layer. And everything in yellow is on the layer called ribbon. They're in essence 3 exact copies of the same thing, but none of them are grouped together yet. So in this one little area, I have 3 completely separate markups that all have 3 separate layer assignments currently. But grouping markups affects layers. If I come in here and draw a selection box around it and I grab those 3 things, pay close attention to the way I go about creating the grouping. I'm going to go to the upper left-hand corner where the red markup is, and I'm going to right-click on it and say Group. What it just did is it just grouped all of those 3 things together. They were on separate layers. They're not anymore. They all got forced onto the project manager's layer. You can see down here where all of them are there. The red cloud, the blue cloud, and the yellow ribbon. They're all on project manager. That was a physical change to the layer assignment. Well, why did it choose project managers? It's because of the way I went about it. Here, I'm going to do the exact same thing in a slightly different way. I'm going to grab all three of those. Now, these are independent. Instead of going to the red markup, I'm going to go to the blue markup, which is on the inspectors layer. And I'm going to right click and say group. Created the same thing, but guess what layer they went to? Everything was forced to inspectors. So where you right click when you are in the act of creating a group of markups together, if they have independent layers, where you right click matters very much. So I'll do it a third time. I'm going to grab all three of those. I'm not going to right click on the red or the blue. I'm going to go to the yellow one, which is on a layer called ribbon. And when I right click there and say, yeah, let's group these things together, you can see there it created a group and it forced everything to the ribbon layer. So I have three identical copies of those markups, and I did the exact same thing, just slightly different, and got three totally different results. So that is what I was trying to illustrate in this slide right here, is that when markups with different layer assignments get grouped together, everything is forced to one layer. That just happens. Which layer depends upon where you right click when you're doing that grouping. Whatever markup you're on top of when you right click, you're subconsciously deciding what that one layer is going to be, and it's going to take that and run with it. So be aware of that and do some of your own experimentation with it. I've only got three more things that I pre-prepared. I'll be happy to answer any questions. And now we're moving from working alone or working with tool sets, and now we're going to a studio session. And this cannot be expressed more loudly, is that layer names, if you want to have and use consistently named layers in a studio session, they have to exist in the PDF files before they get uploaded to the cloud. Because if that's not done, everything you take from these super cool setup tool sets is going to be useless in a studio session, because it's going to place the markup. It's going to look right, but it's not going to be on the proper layer name that you think is there, and it can't create the layers that it needs in a studio session. So let me illustrate that. I'm going to open a studio session. I'm going to actually open two files. All right, so I'm going to open two files here. I'm going to do a file open, and I'm going to grab, this is a empty file that has no layers. This is a empty file, right, that has a bunch of layers. Right? And in there, it's got project managers and inspectors as part of the layer names, which means my tool sets for project managers and inspectors should work perfectly even in the cloud, because this file already has that stuff in there. So let's go to Studio. Now I'm going to go to a session, and I'm going to create a new session. I'm going to just hit no. And I don't want that one up there anyway. So I'm taking these two files, one that has layer names and one that doesn't. Right? And I'm going to call this the Omaha BUG demo. And the rest of that's all fine. I'm just going to hit OK. And it's creating a studio session. It's going to ask me to invite people. I'm just going to cancel out of that. I'm going to close these local documents. And I'm going to now go to the cloud. All right, let's grab this right here. And in the cloud, I'm going to go open those two documents. This is the one that has no layer names, right, but up in the cloud. And we can tell that because of the whiteboard in the tab. That's always a visual clue to you that that file is in a studio session. And then now I'm going to open the one that has named layers. All right, so I've got two files up here. I've got this one with no layers, and I've got this one with layers that were created before I went to the studio session. And then thirdly, I've got a local file that really means nothing, but I'm clicking on it to show you one thing specifically is when I'm working locally, look at the layer commands. All of these layer commands, add before, I can right click on these and there's tons of things I can do to layers when I'm not in the cloud. When I go to any of these documents that are in the cloud, those commands are dead. They're locked. They're inaccessible. You can't manipulate these layers when you're in a studio session. All of that work has to happen before it gets up there. All right? All you can do is work with what you provided yourself to be able to work with. You can't edit, modify, or manipulate what wasn't previously there. That's an important thing to know about studio sessions. So here's what happens. I go into this one that has layers, even though there's nothing there, nothing is drawn on it. The properly named layers, they do exist, and that's what's important. Now I can go to my tool set and I can say, you know what, I want to draw a project manager's comment box, and I want to draw a blue inspector's line. And not only does it do it, it does it and it utilizes the provided, pre-named, pre-created empty layer, and it automatically put that stuff where it is supposed to be, like right there on inspectors. And this one is right there on project manager, right? Because it was there, it was done properly. If we now go to an identical PDF file that just didn't have the layers created before it got to the cloud, it looks the same. It will fool you visually because it creates the markup. It's just not following protocol. Those items are not being drawn on the properly named layer because now they're just going to none. And there's nothing I can do about it. I can't create a new layer. I can't do anything with that. My only option really would be to go to the studio session, get rid of this file, and take the one from the local machine and make sure it is properly set up and bring it up there. So it is a super important thing to know about layers, because ultimately for Bluebeam, for me, that's the end game, is to have a bunch of really cool stuff set up to make me productive alone, but more importantly, to be able to go to the cloud and be productive with the rest of my team. And when I do what I do, it's done properly. And when you do what you do, it's done properly. And we have all of, like this one here, now somebody who was working in this project could still go in and take advantage. They can say, oh yeah, let's turn off the project manager stuff. Let's do that. Let's just turn that off for now. This one, that's not an option because none of the layer names that we needed were created. I can't stress enough the level of importance there is about that particular thing when it comes to layers. Just two more things here is, again, just a text statement. You cannot create or manipulate layer names once it's up there. I already showed that to you. And then the last thing in these typed out messages here is layer names stored in a markup tool set will be ignored when placed during a Bluebeam session if the layer name was not previously created. And that is exactly describing what's happening here versus what's happening here. And this one just wasn't done in a way to support that. So.